Slide 33. Can you record? Are you good with that?
It's recording.
Yep, I'm recording.
All right.
Is there another step? I don't think so. All right, I'm gonna hop right into it. So today we're gonna be talking about the function of behavior. And this is very significant in PBIS, and it comes from the some general theories on behavior. It comes from a long history of applied behavior analysis. It also, some of the core research in PBIS all focus on the function of behavior. And really, that is going to be the approach and the support that we take. I'm sorry, this is not the slide I was talking about. I wasn't even looking at
Okay. Are you starting right from the beginning? Because you had said slide 33, so that's the slide.
It's like the slide with the function of behavior, the 4 bubbles, the like 6 bubbles around function. Does
that look right?
Yeah, I looked up at the screen. I was like, wait a second. Yeah, so that's
I was watching Adam's face. I was like, I don't think I'm on the right slide.
Thanks, I didn't even notice. Anyway, jumping right back into it. So that's really the background of behavioral theory, and the meaning of all behavior we know has meaning. And it's always important to understand that all behavior has function. And that is going to be the approach that we take, this function-based support. We have to spend a lot of time on attention to the environmental context. We're really looking at, the antecedent, behaviors, consequences, really what's going on in the environment when you start to notice these behaviors. There's also a lot of room to look at the history of reinforcement and behavior over time. So we really want to look at, when do these things happen? What sort of reinforcements are in place that may be continuing certain behaviors? And what reinforcements are not in place that maybe could support what practices like teaching and reteaching. So really focusing on that teaching piece when it comes to this, to really sort of interrupt a cycle that's not working for a child or an adult, because we all have behavior and the tenets pretty much are the same, whether you're a youth, a student struggling, or an adult who's educating students, and we still have our own behavior and actions. So we're going to spend a little attention to implementers, adult behaviors, the redesign of the teaching and learning environments in the next few slides. If we go forward. Thank you. So all behavior serves a function, as we just discussed, and it's generally either to obtain something, a desired activity, a tangible item, attention, some kind of stimulation, or it's an effort to avoid something or escape from something, something that you don't enjoy, an aversive activity, something very tangible that you do not care for, like broccoli on a plate, if that is your something you don't care for. Attention or sensory stimulation. So all behavior is really about either trying to get something or trying to avoid or escape from something. Next slide, please. So here is a great little cartoon that gives a pretty clear example of some behavior in this little guy who is apparently, this is his mother. We all so hopefully generationally familiar with Family Circus. I don't know how much longer the slide will be in our training manual, but at this point, this is something we're all pretty familiar with. Any ideas on what this youngster, I believe his name is TJ, is trying to obtain, or do you think there's something he's trying to avoid?
I think he's trying to get his mama's attention. He seems to be following her around.
I agree. Yep. And he seems to stop in between, right? So the behavior, when it has no reinforcement, really kind of ceases to exist because he's not getting what he's trying to get. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another kind of funny cartoon. And this one is an educator who seems to be struggling. Any ideas on what's going on in this cartoon?
Yeah, it looks like she's had a really tough day and really tough class, and she's bringing her class to the principal.
Any guesses on, is this something she is trying to obtain? Is this something she's trying to escape or avoid?
She's trying to avoid the class clearly by sending the whole class down. So yeah.
Yeah. So we can maybe reflect on this one in further slides, go back to this moment, because I'm sure all teachers have been there. And in our later slides this afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about supporting the adult needs and really of avoiding escalation of situations and how to support adults in the building with the skills that they need to maybe avoid this situation. Next slide, please. This is the sort of the cascade of behavior. Again, the two biggest things to talk about here is really, there is a behavior. We know that all behavior has an antecedent, then the actual behavior, and then a consequence. As you go down, you can see that, as we just discussed, it's about obtaining or getting something, or escaping or avoiding something. Is this an animated slide, Adam? So it's going to talk a little bit about positive reinforcement. Great, thank you. So that is a way that when your desire for your behavior is about getting something, that can be positively reinforced. I'm gonna have to do a little more work on this slide. And escape is really about trying to avoid something, and again, that could be a negative reinforcement. There are a lot of reasons, the stimulation, sensory, that you want to avoid or escape from something. Social reasons, we'll see a lot of that, especially in middle and high schools sometimes. And then tangible activities. And again, this all behavior, it's the adults, sometimes it's the peers, sometimes. Next slide, please. Here are a few non-examples. And this is something that we see as we delve into equity issues and some ways of not doing things that will come up in later slides I think you may want to reflect on. Any thoughts on Latana's actions here, or the teacher's actions? I say, Latana, you skipped 2 days of school, so we're going to suspend you for 2 more. Is that reinforcing?
Yeah, I think this is a tough one, right? Because when it comes to significant behaviors like skipping school, providing a consequence that is appropriate is something that is just part of what we do and part of our culture. And sometimes we have to really think about it in the sense of, wow, like that's actually, you know, when you think that's contraindicated when it comes to function, like, you know, when someone's actually trying to avoid school, just giving a person more school to avoid, you know, seems level appropriate, but in seriousness, but may actually really not help the situation. And that's tough.
And this is, again, when we want to reflect, as we had a few slides before, the history of reinforcement. So this is really a negative reinforcement, and it's going to just continue. So if you have that historically going on, something needs to change, or the behavior's not going to change because it's obtaining what she wants, time out of school, perhaps. Would anyone like to take a stab at the next one? Flem, I'm taking your book away because you obviously aren't ready to learn. Some thoughts?
I mean, I just again feel like the student is struggling, and then you're teaching them that when they struggle, you're going to take their work away. So if I were a student who were struggling and you took my work away, I'd be like, sweet, I don't have to do my work. Right,
right. It's reinforcing. And the consequence of this on the adult side is that there's no learning happening. So what are we going to do to change that? Are there other prompts that the educator could give in this scenario? Taking your book away because aren't ready to learn. Well, that's where we get to the teaching principle of, you know, we've talked about the expectation. This is learning time. And please turn back to page 1. Thank you. Do you need to move to a quiet corner? You know, some supports and scaffolding around that. And we'll skip to the next slide because I think we're going to get into more examples. Okay, so how do we determine the function of behavior? Again, this is really, I know I've been talking about this a little ahead of the game, but this is where we talk about the antecedents. What happens before a behavior happens? What generally precedes what's going to happen? What's happening in the environment? What's happening you know, in the next transition? Is it transition to lunch? You know, you have to look at all these factors. And then as far as the behavior goes, what's observable? What can you tell that isn't observable? What does it look like? What is the behavior? The last piece, that consequence, is really what you can infer from what's going on with the youngster, or the adult, what typically follows after that behavior. Is it obtaining something? Is it avoiding or escaping from something? So this is really critical, kind of the core components. If you hold on to some of this today, I think this is one of those pieces you really want to hang on to, because it's, again, it goes back to historical. You want to look at patterns over time with youngsters and adults to understand really what's going on with the behavior.
Yeah.
I know it's a little jarring, isn't it?
Samantha, that was great. So,
Like I just was getting started.
Were people able to see? I think I tried to send out like a 9-minute more. Okay, so it did come through for people. Okay, great. Glad that worked.
that was helpful. Thank you.
Good.
I must have missed it.
I know. If you're involved in presenting, I think, yeah, it would be easy to miss.
I saw I went to panic mode.
No.
You did well. You kept on going, and I was like, just keep on going. This is like, you gotta, yeah, it was great. That was great.
So we have about 30 minutes left, and we did want to talk a little bit about how to support action planning, and then the considerations for modifying content and just generally, as well as for the virtual environment, which, as you can tell, we're learning about each day that we do this as well. But Adam, do you want to, either Adam or Brandy, do you want to jump in and share your screen to discuss just supporting action planning?
I can do it.
Okay, great.
I haven't had a chance to talk yet. Let me share my screen. Okay, so Katie, so I should take about 10 minutes on this, or do more or less?
7, yeah.
7, okay, that sounds good, that's good. Okay, so supporting action planning. So action planning is a critical piece in training a large, complex, multi-component kind frameworks such as school-wide positive behavioral intervention and supports. So because we're asking teams to build so many different pieces of their kind of routines and functioning within their school day, it's important that as they're building each piece, and each piece has multiple steps, that we have some kind of way of talking and planning together and organizing the work that we are doing over sometimes a multi-year training process. So obviously, clear action planning is part of those system features that support staff in the work that they are doing, your teams are doing, your coaches are doing when they work with other people. Again, we need to make sure that we are supporting this, like we're keeping an eye on some of these other features. But action planning, in a sense, is like this could be in so many different levels in schools. Some schools actually might have a really strong way of doing this. Often, many schools that I have experience working with, this isn't something that they have really good systems around. So honestly, initially, it may take some hand-holding to get them up and used to doing this process, because these are usually adults telling other adults what to do, or asking them to do things that we're not used to asking people to sign up for things or follow through with things as well. We just kind of end a meeting and hope things get done. So we're trying to develop systems where that we kind of have better chances that actually products get developed, feedback gets back, we get to look at data. So basically, the general process of what we call action planning is a way that we can organize ourselves and our work to make sure that with all these activities that have multiple steps and components and things that need to get done, we have ways to do that. So, and we kind of develop a plan. So usually we have some kind of document or organizing kind of chart or table that helps us identify kind of what we have left to do, who's going to do it, when, and kind of any notes at the major structure. Again, we hope they're tied to our important outcomes, but we end up, making sure that sometimes that we focus on some outcomes at some times versus other at other times. So the way that the Northeast materials are organized is that we have a bunch of activities across multiple days. And so within each day, as you've kind of seen, that we will show, we'll work on kind of different content, and then we allow teams time to kind of check where they are relative to those content and kind of how that applies to their work. So with this, the way that we've structured it is that during the kind of content time, we give teams a chance to kind of see where they are relative to a particular task, like creating expectations, or lesson plans, or acknowledgement systems, and think about what they have to do to kind of get it to the state that they can actually put it into place. Some teams are going to be that you're going to work with are at different stages, especially in a cohort model like the Massachusetts model that I work with. Some teams are coming in, they have some of these pieces in place, and so they have a little bit to do, or some teams may actually have a lot of work to do. So because of that, we like this kind of strategy that when you're training a particular piece in the morning, we give the teams time to check in with themselves about what they have to do. And then we have a longer period of action planning at the end of the day that teams can use to kind of focus on the different pieces that are important to them and where they are at. Okay. So again, so think about the activity slides when they come up within the Northeast content. And sometimes it might say 10 minutes and you're like, how can anybody do a lesson plan in 10 minutes? And you're right. The trick there is to prompt those teams to kind of think about, what they have to do, what resources they have. Do they have lesson plan structures already? Are they going to be kind of creating a brand new lesson plan tool or using the one that they have, and think about who's going to do it, and then kind of like what a good timeline is for that. And then you maybe use the later afternoon time when you have a larger chunk of time to really kind of start completing tasks. So again, two types of action planning. One is just kind of thinking about where we are and writing it down on a sheet like this. And then the other larger chunk where you might actually get some time to actually work on the actual products. So within that, it's important to, as I kind of alluded to before, provide kind of clear instruction and be very explicit on kind of what the intended outcomes is. Sometimes, again, it is just to kind of have a quick discussion in 10 minutes about kind of like what is currently in place within the school building with the expectations, and are there ones that we need to change, or the things that we need to merge, and then identify what the plan is. Sometimes you have actually time built in to actually work on things, so it, as a trainer, kind of gauge where the teams are at and kind of help them understand how to best use the shorter period of time or the longer period of time. And then during that action planning time, so whether it's 10 minutes or if it's a longer 2-hour block, it's important to circulate and sit in with the teams and kind of hear where their discussions are going, so you can help prompt, or you can help kind of model certain pieces. So I find it helpful to make sure that I become a little bit of a broken record around action planning, and around like, did you write that on the action plan? Is that a sense of like helping them identify exactly, what gets down on the action plan, and then kind of who gets to complete it, and make sure they have kind of realistic timelines. And that's a lot of times usually just takes a little bit of practice, and usually isn't immediate on the first couple of training events. Usually it takes a good half year to kind of get that action planning process down that's really effective and really supports teams and kind of reinforces progress, as the slide says. So the way that the Northeast materials are designed is that there's some prompts and training content specifically related to action planning on days 1 and 3. In year 1, days 1 and 2 are together, and days 3 and 4 are together. In a virtual model, it's going to shift a little bit. But in the beginning, the main point is that there's actually specific content that helps prompt and teach the action planning cycle, in a sense of like, making sure they get explicit practice, kind of just figuring out what their team system is around action planning, and gets the trainer and coach and the team time to kind of discuss what that process looks like for them. And then later on, this kind of shifts a little bit, especially later on in the training sequence, that there's also the team checklist that occurs, and that helps teams figure out, with the whole sequence of building a tier 1 framework, what do they need to work on, what is still left in place, and then that will provide some action planning items for teams to work on. And often the trainers kind of useful in that time to help them integrate those items onto the team checklist action plan onto their standard action plan, so they don't have multiple action plan lists, that they have one that kind of really guides the work that they're doing. So yeah, then you'll notice again on each activity slide, there's also action planning prompts. So that helps them think about kind of what they have to do. And this, as a trainer, just help the teams think about, is this an activity that you need to work on? Or is this something that you already have? Because each team is going to kind of interact with the content in different ways. So at the end of a training chunk, so in a typical operation of the sequence, it would be days 1 and 2, days 3 and 4, days 5 and 6. At the end of a training event, teams are prompted, or coaches are prompted to submit their action plans for review and support. So I think this is a great opportunity to help shape that action planning process. Sometimes it takes multiple prompts. Don't worry about that. That's very normal. A lot of times action plans, may come across very kind of sparse and need a lot of feedback. Some have a lot of work and just kind of need some shaping, but it's good to kind of develop an email system and figure that out. And so coaches know before they leave that they're supposed to email it into the trainer for just some extra support and feedback. And that's a great way to monitor kind of what your teams are working on, what's important for them, and also what things that they might be missing that they might want to think about. So don't just look at the action plan for what's on there. Look at the action plan for kind of maybe what's not on there and what they need to be kind of paying attention to. So sometimes it's good to kind of think about, like, if they haven't looked at, something around equity, if they don't have a parent on their team and that's not something that's in their action plan, then maybe we help prompt that, So something to think about with that. Okay, and then, again, take the time to review the action plan, just like as I said. Think about kind of how this relates to their outcomes, how it relates to the kind of important pieces of the framework, anything that they're missing, and kind of give that feedback. Again, the overall action planning process, and especially if you do this well with the prompting and giving feedback earlier on, you can kind of help shape that action plan for that team to really help them move forward and more efficiently, and then makes the whole process of reviewing more efficiently later on in the process as well. So yeah, and then as you get into the end with the Northeast materials, we actively do the tiered fidelity inventory, the TFI, in the spring, and then that helps add more things to that action plan. Sorry, there's a construction zone in my neighborhood right now. So with that, it's important to help them as they're doing other fidelity tools, to help link it to kind of an action plan. That's one kind of action plan that guides all of their work, instead of having 3 different action plans. So think about that as they are kind of doing different fidelity checks, and helping support that. So, okay, I can't see my whole screen. And so now I'm like, okay, so now this is just an activity that we typically would do at this time. Katie, I'm not sure we have time to do this for now.
No, sorry, we don't have time.
Okay, I wanted to check in on that. Great, so I will stop here. Is there any questions or comments on action planning?
I'm just going to make a comment. I know Brandy's going to shift into adjusting content and we'll talk just briefly about virtual models, but I will just say, and I'll